They call her dangerous, not to her face, never directly, but behind closed doors and hushed conversations in the looks they exchange when she walks into a room. They call her intimidating, intense, hard to read, cold, difficult, too much, not enough, changed. And they're right, she has changed, but not in the way they think. She's not dangerous because she's aggressive. She's dangerous because she stopped performing. She's not intimidating because she's harsh. She's intimidating because she's certain. She's not cold because she doesn't care. She's cold because she stopped caring about things that were never hers to care about in the first place. Watch her, she doesn't explain herself anymore. She doesn't justify her boundaries. She doesn't defend her choices. She doesn't apologize for taking up space. She doesn't shrink when they're uncomfortable. She doesn't smile when she doesn't mean it. She doesn't stay when it's time to leave. She just exists fully, unapologetically, on her own terms. And that terrifies people, because a woman who knows herself is untouchable. A woman who's done healing herself is uncontrollable. A woman who's integrated her shadow is unstoppable. And the world wasn't designed for that kind of woman. Through a Jungian lens, this woman has completed what most people never even start. She's gone through what Jung called individuation. She's faced the parts of herself everyone told her to hide. She's integrated what she was told to suppress. She's reclaimed what she was taught to give away. And now she's self-possessed, internally anchored, sovereign over her own life. This isn't about cruelty, it's about containment. This isn't about punishing anyone, it's about finally stopping the abandonment of herself. This isn't empowerment content, this isn't self-help. This is psychology. The psychology of the woman who stopped living for approval and started living for truth. The woman who stopped performing an approved version of herself and started embodying who she actually is. The woman who stopped being what they needed and became who she was always meant to be. Jung understood something about this transformation that most people miss. He saw that the most powerful version of a person isn't the one who fits in. It's the one who's been broken, rebuilt, and integrated. The one who's walked through their own darkness and come out whole. The one who's no longer seeking permission to exist. She's just being, and that being, it's the most powerful force most people will ever encounter. This video is about her, the final stage, the woman called dangerous, and why she's not what you think she is. Let's start at the beginning, because you don't become dangerous overnight. You don't wake up one day self-led, boundaried, and untouchable. You earn it, through stages most women don't survive, through transformations most women turn back from, through deaths most women refuse to die. Jung's framework helps us understand the archetypal journey from fragmented to whole, and it's brutal, because each stage requires you to let go of something the world told you was essential. Your agreeableness, your softness, your need to be liked, your willingness to sacrifice, your compulsion to nurture everyone but yourself. Each stage strips away a layer of conditioning, and each layer, it feels like losing yourself, until you realize you're not losing yourself. You're finding yourself underneath all the performance. Stage 1 is what Jung would call the persona stage. This is the woman who's still performing, still trying to be everything to everyone, still managing everyone's emotions, still absorbing everyone's chaos, still shrinking to make others comfortable. She's the good girl, the nice one, the one who never complains, the one who's always available, the one who puts everyone first, and she's drowning. She just doesn't know it yet because the persona feels safe, it gets approval, it avoids conflict. It keeps her connected, but it's not her, it's a mask, and the longer she wears it, the more of herself she loses. Stage 2 is the collapse. Something breaks, a betrayal, a loss, a realization, and suddenly the persona can't hold anymore. She can't keep performing, she can't keep giving, she can't keep pretending she's okay. She falls apart, and everyone around her panics, because they needed her to be the persona, they needed her stable, available, giving, and now she's not. Now she's raw, unpredictable, unavailable, and they call it a breakdown. But through a Jungian lens, it's not a breakdown. It's a breakthrough in disguise. The old self is dying, and something real is trying to be born. 3 is the wilderness. This is the stage where she isolates, not because she's depressed, but because she doesn't know how to be around people anymore. The old version of her is gone, but the new version hasn't fully emerged yet, so she withdraws. She stops showing up. She stops explaining. She stops trying to maintain relationships that require her to be someone she's not, and people think she's lost, but she's not lost. She's searching for herself, for what's real, for what's hers, and that search. It can only happen in solitude. Stage 4 is shadow integration. This is where most women turn back, because this stage requires you to face the parts of yourself you've been taught to hate. Your anger, your selfishness, your ambition, your rage, your sexuality, your power, all the parts that make you too much or not appropriate. Jung believed that you can't become whole without integrating the shadow, without owning the darkness, without accepting that you're not just light, you're complex, contradictory, human. And when a woman integrates her shadow, she becomes self-possessed because she's no longer controlled by what she's suppressing. She owns all of it, and ownership is power. Stage 5 is sovereignty. This is the final stage. The woman who's walked through all the previous stages and emerged whole. She's not performing anymore. She's not collapsing. She's not searching. She's not integrating. She just is. She's clear, grounded, boundaried, real. She knows who she is. She knows what she wants. She knows what she won't tolerate. And she doesn't need anyone's permission to be that woman. That's what Jung called individuation, and that's what makes her dangerous. Most women never make it to stage 5. They get stuck in stage 1 performing until they burn out, or they hit stage 2 and rebuild the persona as fast as possible, or they reach stage 3 and come back before the work is done, or they start stage 4 and panic at the darkness. But the women who make it through, the ones who walk all 5 stages, they're the ones people call dangerous, not because they're cruel, but because they're free. And freedom in a woman who knows herself is threatening to a world that needs her compliant. So what does dangerous actually look like? What are the qualities that make people uncomfortable? What is it about the self-led woman that threatens the status quo? Let me be specific, because dangerous doesn't mean what you think it means. It doesn't mean aggressive. It doesn't mean hostile. It doesn't mean combative. Dangerous in this context means unpredictable to people who were used to controlling her. It means unmanageable to people who benefited from her self-abandonment. It means unavailable to people who took her for granted. First, she doesn't explain herself. This is the quality that unsettles people the most. The old version of her would justify every decision, every boundary, every no. She'd write paragraph-long explanations for why she couldn't do something. She'd apologize for having needs. She'd overclarify to avoid being misunderstood. But the self-possessed woman, she just states what is. I'm not available. That doesn't work for me. I'm choosing differently. No explanation, no justification. No apology, just clarity. Here's what that looks like in real life. Someone texts asking for a favor. The old her would respond immediately with 3 paragraphs explaining why she can't, apologizing profusely, offering alternatives. The new her, I won't be able to help with that, send. And she doesn't check her phone, anxiously waiting for their response. She trusts the boundary and moves on. And people don't know what to do with that, because they're used to negotiating with her, used to guilt-tripping her, used to convincing her to change her mind. But you can't negotiate with someone who doesn't need your approval, and that makes her dangerous. Second, she's emotionally unreactive. She doesn't rise to bait anymore. She doesn't defend herself against projections. She doesn't engage with manipulation. Someone tries to provoke her. She doesn't react. Someone tries to guilt her. She doesn't absorb it. Someone tries to blame her. She doesn't take it on. She just observes, considers, responds or doesn't respond. But she's not controlled by their emotions anymore. Here's the scene: family dinner. Someone makes a passive-aggressive comment designed to get a reaction. Must be nice to have so much free time now that you're not helping anyone anymore. The old her would have frozen, would have felt the shame wash over her, would have spent the rest of the meal trying to prove she's still good, still caring, still worthy. The new her, she takes a sip of water, looks at them calmly, interesting perspective, and continues eating. No defense, no explanation, just presence. Jung's work on differentiation explains this. She's learned to separate her psyche from the collective. She's no longer enmeshed. She can be present without being absorbed, and that emotional self-possession, it's terrifying to people who used to control her through her empathy. Third, she's selectively available. She's not accessible to everyone anymore. She doesn't respond immediately. She doesn't show up out of obligation. She doesn't maintain relationships that drain her. She's selective about who gets her time, her energy, her presence, and she doesn't feel guilty about it. She's learned that her capacity is finite, that her energy is sacred, that not everyone deserves access to her, so she protects it fiercely. And people call that selfish, but it's not. It's self-respect. It's knowing that you can't pour from an empty cup, and refusing to empty yourself for people who wouldn't do the same for you. Fourth, she trusts herself more than she trusts external validation. She's not looking for permission anymore. She's not waiting for consensus. She's not checking if her choices make sense to other people. She's internally anchored in her own intuition, her own values, her own knowing, and when she makes a decision, she doesn't second-guess it based on what others think. She trusts herself fully, and that self-trust, it makes her unshakable. Because you can't manipulate someone who trusts themselves more than they trust your opinion of them. Fifth, she's boundaried without explanation. She sets boundaries and enforces them without negotiation. She doesn't give 3 warnings. She doesn't over-explain why the boundary exists. She just sets it, and if you cross it, you're out, not with drama, not with anger, just with distance, permanent distance. Here's what that looks like. Someone crosses a clearly stated boundary. The old her would have addressed it, given them another chance, explained again why it matters. The new her, she simply steps back, doesn't announce it, doesn't explain it, just creates space. And if they notice and ask, she might say, I told you what I needed, you chose differently, so I'm choosing differently too, and that's the end of the conversation. And people think that's harsh, but it's not. It's self-respect. It's knowing that people who don't respect your boundaries don't respect you, and refusing to tolerate disrespect in the name of being nice. Sixth, she's integrated her darkness. She's not at war with her anger, her ambition, her sexuality, her power anymore. She owns it, she holds it consciously, and she doesn't apologize for it. The self-possessed woman isn't trying to be palatable. She's not performing softness to make others comfortable. She's real, fully human, light and dark, soft and fierce, nurturing and ruthless, and that wholeness, it's magnetic, but it's also threatening. Because it challenges the narrative that women should be one-dimensional. The undivided woman proves that's a lie, and that proof disrupts everything. This isn't about becoming cold or cruel. It's about becoming contained. It's about finally learning that sovereignty isn't hatred of others, it's self-respect without negotiation. Let me tell you what she had to go through to get here, because no woman becomes self-led by accident. She becomes self-led by facing what most women spend their entire lives avoiding, her shadow. Jung believed that the shadow contains everything we've disowned about ourselves, everything we've been told is unacceptable, everything we've suppressed to be loved, to belong, to survive. And for women, the shadow is especially heavy, because women are taught from childhood to suppress so much. The anger, the ambition, the selfishness, the power, the sexuality, the rage, all of it gets buried, and that burial creates the persona, the nice girl, the good woman. The one who's always kind, always giving, always available. But the self-possessed woman, she stopped burying. She turned around, she looked at the shadow, and she integrated it. Here's what that actually looked like. First, she faced her anger. For years, maybe decades, she swallowed it. Every time she was disrespected, dismissed, taken for granted, she smiled. She stayed calm. She kept the peace, because women aren't supposed to be angry. Women are supposed to be understanding, forgiving, patient, but her anger was still there, underground, building pressure. She felt it in her throat every time she wanted to speak up and didn't. She felt it in her stomach every time she absorbed someone's disrespect and said nothing. She felt it in her sleep, the dreams where she finally screamed, finally fought back, finally said what she'd been holding. And one day it erupted, not at the person who deserved it, at someone random, something small, and she realized, I've been carrying this for years, and it's been poisoning me, so she stopped swallowing it, she owned it, she let herself feel it fully. And she learned that anger isn't bad, anger is information. It tells you when your boundaries have been crossed, when your needs have been ignored, when you've been disrespected. And once she learned to listen to her anger instead of suppress it, she became untouchable, because she stopped tolerating what she used to accept. Second, she faced her selfishness. Women are taught that selfishness is the worst thing you can be, that your worth is tied to how much you give, how much you sacrifice, how much you put others first, and she believed that. For years, she gave until she had nothing left. She prioritized everyone but herself. She felt guilty for having needs, but one day she realized, I'm empty, I have nothing left to give, not because I'm broken, but because I gave it all away, and no one's filling me back up. So she stopped, she started choosing herself, she started saying no, she started protecting her energy, and people called her selfish, but she didn't care anymore because she'd learned that self-care isn't selfish, it's survival, and if putting yourself first makes you selfish, then she'd rather be selfish than dead. Third, she faced her power. Women are taught to make themselves small, to not be too much, to not threaten, to not outshine, and she internalized that. She dimmed her light, she played small. She pretended she didn't know as much as she did, she let others take credit. She stayed in the background, but one day she got tired of shrinking. She got tired of making others comfortable at the expense of her own expansion. She felt it in her bones, the exhaustion of constant self-monitoring, the weight of always calculating how much space to take, the toll of perpetually dimming. So she stopped, she took up space, she spoke up, she let herself be seen, and people were uncomfortable. They called her arrogant, intimidating, too much, but she didn't shrink back, because she'd learned that her power isn't something to apologize for, it's something to own. And if people can't handle her at full capacity, they don't deserve access to her at all. Fourth, she faced her sexuality. Women's sexuality is policed from every direction. Too sexual, you're inappropriate. Not sexual enough, you're cold. Express it on your own terms, you're dangerous. And she absorbed all of that. She suppressed her desires. She performed sexuality for others. She disconnected from her own body. But one day she reclaimed it. She stopped performing. She stopped seeking validation. She connected to her own pleasure, her own desire, on her own terms. And she stopped letting anyone shame her for it, because she'd learned that her sexuality is hers, not theirs, and owning it fully is one of the most powerful things a woman can do. Fifth, she faced her standards. She'd been told her whole life not to be too picky, to compromise, to lower her standards, to be realistic, and she tried. She dated people who didn't meet her standards. She stayed in friendships that drained her. She worked jobs that didn't respect her, and she was miserable, so she stopped compromising. She raised her standards. She became ruthless about who and what she allowed in her life, and people said she was unrealistic, that she'd end up alone. That she was asking for too much, but she didn't care, because she'd learned that having standards isn't arrogance, it's self-respect, and she'd rather be alone than settle. That's the shadow work, that's what she faced, that's what made her self-possessed, not because the shadow made her dark, but because integrating it made her whole. and a whole woman is a powerful woman, and a powerful woman threatens a system built on her fragmentation. There's a moment, a specific moment when everything changes, when the woman who was once desperate for approval suddenly stops caring, when the woman who was once afraid to disappoint suddenly stops explaining, when the woman who was once performing for validation suddenly stops performing. Jung would describe this as the shift from external orientation to internal orientation. It's the moment when her sense of self stops being dependent on others' perceptions and starts being anchored in her own reality. And that shift, it's not gradual, it's sudden, like a switch flipping. One day she's explaining herself, the next day she's not, one day she's seeking approval, the next day she's not, one day she cares what they think, the next day she doesn't. Here's what triggers the shift. It's not a choice, it's exhaustion. She spent years, maybe decades, trying to be what everyone needed, trying to fit, trying to please, trying to avoid conflict, trying to be liked, and one day she's just too tired to explain, too tired to perform, too tired to care, and in that exhaustion she lets go, not with anger, not with resentment, she just releases the need for approval, the fear of judgment, the compulsion to make everyone comfortable. She releases all of it and something in her relaxes. For the first time in her life, she's not monitoring herself, she's not managing others' emotions, she's just being, and it feels like freedom. But here's what makes this shift dangerous. Once it happens, it's irreversible. She can't go back to performing, she can't go back to caring, she can't go back to shrinking, because she's tasted what it feels like to be free, and nothing is worth giving that up, not approval, not connection, not safety, nothing, so she doesn't go back, she moves forward as herself, fully, unapologetically. And people panic because they're used to the old version, the accommodating one, the predictable one. The one who could be managed, and now she's not that person anymore. Now she's self-led, and that can't be controlled. Here's what the shift looks like in practice. She stops responding to texts immediately, not because she's playing games, but because she's not obligated to be constantly available. She stops attending events out of obligation, not because she's antisocial, but because her time is valuable. She stops explaining her decisions, not because she's secretive, but because she doesn't need consensus. She stops apologizing for having boundaries, not because she's harsh, but because boundaries aren't something to apologize for. She stops performing emotion, not because she's cold, but because authenticity matters more than perception. And people don't know what to do with her. They try the old tactics: guilt, manipulation, silent treatment, passive aggression, and she doesn't react, she doesn't chase, she doesn't over-explain, she just observes, and if the behavior continues, she leaves, not with drama, just with distance. And that distance is permanent, because she's learned something crucial. People who respected the old version of her didn't actually respect her. They respected her compliance. And now that she's no longer compliant, they have nothing to respect, so they leave, or she leaves. And either way, she's okay with it, because she'd rather be alone and free than connected and caged. Jung understood that individuation is a separation from the collective, and that's exactly what this shift is. She's no longer part of the herd, she's no longer following the script, she's no longer living by rules she didn't write, she's individuated. And that individuation makes her internally anchored, not because she's isolated, but because nothing external can shake that anchor anymore. Let me tell you what people say about her now. They call her cold, detached, hard to read, unfeeling, changed. They say she's not the person she used to be, that she's become someone else, someone harder, someone less warm, someone less accessible. And they're right, she has changed, but not in the way they think. She's not cold, she's boundaried, she's not detached, she's selective, she's not hard to read, she's just not performing emotion to make you comfortable. She's not unfeeling, she just stopped feeling things that aren't hers to feel. Jung's concept of differentiation explains what's happened. She's learned to separate her emotions from others' emotions, to be present without absorbing, to care without carrying, to witness without merging. And that differentiation looks like coldness to people who were used to her enmeshment, because enmeshment feels warm, it feels connected, it feels like care, but it's not care, it's codependence, and she's done with codependence. Here's what's actually happening. She stopped absorbing everyone's chaos. She used to walk into a room and immediately pick up on everyone's emotional state. Anxious, angry, sad, whatever they were feeling, she'd feel it too, and she'd spend the entire interaction trying to manage it, trying to make them feel better, trying to lighten the mood, trying to fix it. But now she notices the emotional state, she acknowledges it, but she doesn't take it on, she doesn't make it her responsibility, and that looks cold, because people were used to her absorbing, they're not used to her witnessing, and witnessing without absorbing feels like rejection to people who needed her to carry their emotions for them. She stopped over-explaining. She used to justify every decision, every boundary, every no. She'd give elaborate reasons. She'd make sure you understood. She'd reassure you that it wasn't personal. But now she just states what is. I'm not available. That doesn't work for me. I'm choosing differently. And she lets you sit with that. No elaboration, no reassurance, no apology, just the truth. And that feels cold, because people interpret lack of explanation as lack of care. But it's not, it's respect. She's respecting you enough to assume you can handle a boundary without needing it sugar-coated. She stopped performing emotional availability. She used to be the person everyone came to, the listener, the advice giver, the shoulder to cry on, and she was always available, always present, always willing to drop everything to help. But now she's selective. She shows up for the people who show up for her, for the relationships that are mutual, for the connections that feel reciprocal. And if you're not in that circle, you don't get access, not because she doesn't care, but because she's learned that emotional labor isn't infinite, and she's not giving it to people who wouldn't give it back. She stopped chasing people who pull away. She used to panic when someone went quiet. She'd reach out, she'd check in, she'd try to fix whatever was wrong. She'd take responsibility for the distance even when it wasn't hers to take. But now, if you pull away, she lets you. She doesn't chase, she doesn't beg, she doesn't convince, she just observes. And if you come back, she'll evaluate whether she wants to let you in. But she's not chasing anymore. Because she's learned that people who want to be in her life will stay, and people who don't won't, and either way, she's okay. That's the price of integration. People who benefited from her lack of boundaries will call her cold. People who took advantage of her emotional availability will call her detached. People who needed her to shrink will call her changed, and she is changed, but not in the way they mean. She's not colder, she's clearer, she's not detached, she's differentiated, she's not hard, she's whole. And wholeness to people who needed her broken looks like coldness. And yes, sometimes she misses the old warmth, the ease of connection that came from giving everything, the comfort of being needed, but she doesn't miss the cage, she doesn't miss the exhaustion, she doesn't miss the resentment, she doesn't miss waking up every day feeling like she'd abandoned herself. Jung said that the more integrated you become, the lonelier the path gets, not because you're isolated, but because fewer people can meet you where you are, and the self-possessed woman has learned to be okay with that, because she'd rather be whole and alone than fragmented and surrounded. So what does she have now that she didn't have before? What did all that shadow work, all that integration, all that transformation actually give her? Jung's framework gives us language for it. She's individuated, she's integrated, she's internally anchored. But what does that actually mean in practice? What does self-possession look like when you're living it? First, she has clarity. She knows who she is, not who she should be, not who people need her to be, not who she used to be, but who she actually is. Right now, in this moment, she knows her values, she knows her boundaries, she knows her limits, she knows her desires, she knows her non-negotiables, and that clarity is unshakable because it's not based on external feedback, it's based on internal truth, and internal truth doesn't shift with opinion, it's steady, rooted, real. Second, she has discernment. She can read people now. She can see through performance. She can spot manipulation. She can sense inauthenticity. She can identify red flags. She can detect when someone's words don't match their energy. And she trusts that discernment. She doesn't override it. She doesn't rationalize it away. She doesn't give people the benefit of the doubt when her gut is screaming no. She just listens and acts accordingly. And that discernment protects her in ways most women never experience, because most women are taught to ignore their intuition, to give people chances, to not be judgmental. But the self-led woman has learned that discernment isn't judgment, it's self-protection, and she protects herself ruthlessly. Third, she has energy, not because she's less busy, but because she's no longer leaking herself into dysfunction. She's not absorbing everyone's chaos. She's not maintaining relationships that drain her. She's not performing for people who don't see her. She's not giving to people who don't reciprocate, so her energy stays with her, and she uses it for what actually matters: her work, her growth, her joy, her rest. And that energy makes her productive, creative, and present in ways she never was when she was depleted. Fourth, she has peace, not because her life is problem-free, but because she's no longer at war with herself. She's integrated the parts she used to suppress. She's accepted the parts she used to hate. She's owned the parts she used to hide, and that integration creates internal peace. She's not fighting her anger anymore. She's not suppressing her ambition anymore. She's not hiding her power anymore. She's just herself, fully. And that self-acceptance is the foundation of peace. Because you can't be at peace when you're at war with who you are. Fifth, she has standards, and she doesn't compromise them. She knows what she deserves, she knows what she's worth, she knows what she won't tolerate, and she enforces that, without negotiation, without exceptions, without guilt. If you don't meet her standards, you don't get access, not because she's arrogant, but because she's learned that lowering standards doesn't create connection, it creates resentment. And she's done resenting people for not meeting standards she never communicated. Now she communicates clearly, and if you can't meet them, you're not in her life, and she's okay with that. 6, she has presence. She's not distracted by what people think anymore. She's not monitoring herself. She's not performing. She's just present in her body, in the moment, in her life. And that presence is magnetic because most people are performing, most people are monitoring, most people are distracted, but she's just there, fully. And that full presence is rare and powerful, and it draws the right people in while keeping the wrong people out. Seventh, she's self-governed. She's the authority over her own life. She doesn't need permission. She doesn't need validation. She doesn't need consensus. She makes her own decisions. She sets her own rules. She lives by her own values, and she doesn't apologize for it. That's what Jung meant by individuation, and it's the most powerful thing a woman can claim. Jung said the goal of individuation is to become who you truly are, and the self-possessed woman has done exactly that. She's not performing a role. She's not living someone else's script. She's just her, fully individuated, fully integrated, fully anchored internally, and that fullness is what makes her dangerous. Let me tell you what her life looks like now, because it's not what you'd expect. It's not loud. It's not impressive from the outside. It's not the life social media would celebrate. It's quiet, intentional, small, and extraordinarily powerful. She's not chasing anymore. She's not proving anything. She's not building a life that looks good. She's building a life that feels real, and real looks different than you'd think. She has fewer friends, but the ones she has are real. They see her, they match her energy, they respect her boundaries, they show up consistently. And she shows up for them the same way. There's no performance, no obligation, no one-sided giving, just mutual presence, mutual respect, mutual care, and that small circle, it's everything, because she's learned that you don't need a lot of people, you just need the right people. She works differently. She's not grinding anymore. She's not hustling. She's not trying to prove her worth through productivity. She works at a pace that sustains her. She chooses projects that mean something. She says no to opportunities that don't align. And her work, it's better because it's coming from a place of alignment instead of desperation. She's not trying to earn value. She's expressing value. And that shift changes everything. She spends more time alone, not because she's lonely, but because she likes her own company. She's integrated enough that solitude doesn't feel like isolation. It feels like sanctuary. She reads, she thinks, she creates, she rests, she processes, and she doesn't feel guilty about it because she's learned that time alone isn't wasted time. It's where integration happens. It's where clarity emerges. It's where she reconnects to herself. And that connection is the source of everything else. She moves slower. She's not rushing anymore. She's not trying to keep up with anyone. She's not optimizing for productivity. She's moving at the pace that feels right for her, and from the outside it looks like she's doing less, but she's not. She's doing what matters and cutting out what doesn't. And that selectivity makes her more effective than she's ever been because she's not scattered anymore. She's focused on what's real, on what's hers, on what actually moves her forward. She's okay with being misunderstood. People don't get her anymore. They think she's changed. They think she's cold. They think she's selfish. They think she's too much or not enough. And she doesn't correct them. She doesn't explain. She doesn't defend. She just lets them think what they think. Because she's learned that being understood by people who don't see you isn't actually understanding. It's performance. And she's done performing. Jung said that individuation separates you from the collective, and he was right. The self-led woman's life is smaller, quieter, and less impressive from the outside. But from the inside, it's everything, because it's hers, not theirs, hers, and that ownership is worth more than any external validation could ever be. Let me end with the truth they'll never understand. The dangerous woman isn't dangerous because she's cruel. She's dangerous because she's free. She's not intimidating because she's harsh. She's intimidating because she's self-led. She's not cold because she's unfeeling. She's cold because she stopped feeling things that weren't hers to feel. She's not the villain in their story. She's the woman who stopped playing a role in their script. And that's what they can't forgive, because a woman who knows herself is untouchable. A woman who's healed herself is unmanageable. A woman who's integrated her shadow is unstoppable. And the world wasn't built for that kind of woman. Jung understood this. He understood that the most powerful version of a person is the individuated version, the one who's faced their shadow, the one who's integrated their wholeness, the one who stopped living for the collective and started living for truth. And the self-possessed woman, she's done exactly that. She's not performing anymore. She's not hiding anymore. She's not apologizing anymore. She's just being fully, unapologetically, anchored internally. And that being, it's the most powerful force most people will ever encounter. This isn't about becoming cold or cruel. It's about becoming whole. It's about learning that self-respect without negotiation isn't hatred of others. It's finally learning to stop hating yourself. They call her dangerous, and they're right. But not for the reasons they think. She's dangerous because she stopped abandoning herself for anyone. She's dangerous because she stopped performing for approval. She's dangerous because she stopped caring about people who never cared back. Jung knew the woman who integrates her shadow and becomes internally anchored becomes unstoppable. Not because she's cruel, but because she's free. And freedom in a woman who knows herself changes everything.